Hello, I'm Dr. Barry Duncan, and I'm going to talk to you today about supervision for a change, not only in clients, but in us as well. I'll be talking about the 4 steps of PCOMS supervision. You can read all about the 4 steps of supervision in the new PCOMS manual, your everything resource for everything PCOMS. So what people forget is that, believe it or not, that PCOMS is just not flicking forms. It's a clinical process that's fully integrated into the work itself. And like any clinical process, its success rests on the therapist. The therapist has to believe in it, has to do it, has to actually want the feedback from clients to guide and direct the work. And unless the data are used to identify at-risk clients, those clients who aren't benefiting, it's not really worth the paper it's written on or the electronic system that you happen to be using. You have to identify the clients and then do something about it, both within the therapy session, change what you're doing, and also at the agency level to figure out what else can be done with clients who aren't benefiting. So I want to talk to you about these 4 steps of supervision. And here they are, but it starts with a very, very extensive look at the scores themselves, because the job 1 of supervision is to ensure data integrity. So people have to use the measures correctly for you to have data integrity. PCOMS has to be integrated into the work, or it's not going to yield data that identifies those clients who aren't benefiting, which is its whole idea for being. So that's what we're going to talk about first. And of course, this is the hardest part of doing supervision, is holding people accountable. It's a lot easier to do supportive supervision, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if all you're doing is that, you're really not giving clients a very good service, because client welfare is the first function of supervision. So it's harder to do that part, but you have to question and challenge. Sometimes you have to put people on the spot. But if you're going to get data integrity, if you actually are going to identify at-risk clients, that's what you have to do to ensure that people are using the measures so that it will do its main function. So here are the things to look for. First of all, if someone has more than 30% of their intakes that are over the cutoff, they may have some trouble with how they are introducing the ORS. Now, if they are seeing mandated clients, primarily, of course, you're going to have more clients over the clinical cutoff. But if they have a regular outpatient caseload, it will be, generally speaking, not over 30%. A big telltale sign is intake scores between 32 and 40. These scores are rarely valid. Generally speaking, it means that the therapist isn't introducing the measure very well, and certainly not making sure that the scores match up with the client's experience. So if the client comes in a lot of distress and scores a fairly high score, that means they're not matching up and the therapist isn't attending to that. And then finally, scores that look like a saw, right, or like a sawtooth or a mountain range, or however you want to look at that. They go up and down dramatically. And this is probably means the client's using it as emotional thermometer, which is easy for clients to do. That, the kind of default response is how I'm feeling at this moment, or how the week has went, rather than how the week has went related to the reasons for service. So these are the main validity indicators. And guess what? Better Outcomes Now helps you achieve all of those things, because validity checks are integrated into Better Outcomes Now to help the supervisory process. So here you see right from the client rater page, from the rater page where we look at how clients are doing a whole caseload, you can see now that you can filter and find these clients who are above 32, who are above the clinical cutoff, who have that sawtooth pattern. You can see it also identifies the clients who have an intake score of above 32. So there are these ways of helping you be able to track data validity and data integrity so that you can get your therapist up to snuff very quickly so that it will identify their at-risk clients. And on the stats page now, it includes how many raters are above 32, how many are above the clinical cutoff, and how many have the sawtooth pattern, so that you can have that check in there, and you also can then see if your therapists are improving over time with that and getting better at how they are integrating PCOMS into their clinical work. It's hard, but putting them on the spot probably will make it more quickly. So to deal with the first 2 aspects, it's just asking therapists to introduce the ORS to you. If they stumble around and can't do that, you know they're not doing it very well with their clients. And just reinforce that it must match up with the client's distress, it must match up with the client's reasons for service, and really it's their job to make that happen. Or PCOMS and better outcomes now is not worth the time, effort, and money it takes to use them. You know, you may also see this kind of thing, the sawtooth pattern or mountain range pattern. This too will really wreak havoc on your data integrity, because it's not, you know, this client's data has no integrity. It's an emotional thermometer. It's how they're feeling that day or how the week is going, not related to the reasons for service. So generally I just ask the therapist, well, what problems are you working on? What are the reasons for service, and how is that connected to the ORS? And you'll hear a pregnant pause, and they won't have done that already. So, and sometimes it means that they don't have much focus in their work, which is a larger clinical issue. You know, focus is an incredibly underrated therapist skill. It's much easier not to have focus in the work. So when the conversation jumps from topic to topic without any thematic connection to what could be different in the client's life, then we have this ongoing process of just discussing all the things that are going on in people's lives. And it becomes a therapy without end. An ongoing commentary how things are going, rather than a focused conversation about what can be different to address the things that are problematic in the client's lives. PCOMS really helps here, helps therapists stay focused. It really can bring focus to the work by identifying that scale that's lower than the rest, connecting it to the reasons for service, and then leading to that very important conversation of what's it going to take to move this just 1 centimeter to the right. What's it going to take in here, and what's it going to take for you to notice that on the outside? And if you don't do that, then this quickly becomes quite a worthless endeavor. It's not related to the reasons for service. You just have to reinforce these things. You just have to ask them what the reasons for service are, how it's connected, and bring it up a few times. People will get it if you reinforce it, and also that it's their responsibility to make those things happen. You can also use the PCOMS Provider Adherence Scale. Many have found it useful to reinforce the 10 skills of PCOMS. You simply give it to your supervisees, have them rate themselves on the Likert scale of the 10 skills, and it's a way to help them keep these skills on the front burner until they integrate it into the way that they work. You can find the 10 skills of PCOMS and this adherence scale on the resource tab under articles and handouts on the betteroutcomesnow.com website. Once we've done that, once we have data integrity, then we can go on to the real business of supervision, which is talking about these clients who aren't benefiting from the service and figuring out what else that we can do next time to help those clients get on track to do better. It's also a time when we shape the conversation, we brainstorm options, and I'll talk about each of those things in a bit. When you go to the raters page of the particular therapist that you are supervising, you see the progress meter here, and that instantly tells you who the clients are who aren't benefiting you here. So you have this client's in the red, this client down here is in the red, and of course those would be the ones you'd want to look at the graph and talk about. You also notice on that page that there's a progress meter, and the progress meter is something that I think is very cool that alerts you to who you should be talking about. And it's really not a difficult thing to figure out how the progress meter is done. You just need to get some facility with it so you understand it. So let's talk about this just for a moment. So you have your intake score here. You have 20.7, and that plots the expected treatment response, or that green line. It's the average trajectory of change for clients who come in with this intake score. It's what we're hoping for the client. It's kind of our insurance to gauge how clients are doing, to let us know whether or not they're benefiting as we would hope that they would be. And to clients, I often say, this is what we had hoped to see happen for you. And so they have the intake of 20.7, and you can see that they are at the 4th session and are a 22.8. So actually the ETR for the 4th session, or each point along the way, is the target for that particular session, right? It's the target on the expected treatment response. And in the 4th session, our target actually is where we'd like for them to be, is 27.2. Where they actually are 22.8. If we take their actual change right? Oops. 2.1, which is what the difference is between 20.7 and 22.8, their actual change, 2.1, and we divide it by what we had hoped for them, which is that 27.2 minus 20.7, or 6.5, and we divide the 2.1 by the 6.5, and we get the 32.3%, which is what you see reflected here on the progress meter. In the red here, 32.3, they've achieved 32.3% of what we're hoping for them, and that's what's depicted on that progress meter. Keep in mind also that when you're doing supervision with PCOMS with your therapist, you are actually bringing the client's voice into the supervisory discussion, because it's the client's view of their progress is what is kind of running the supervisory process. So it is a way that clients have never been prioritized before, is to allow their voice to enter this. They choose who is ultimately discussed. So here's the sequence of questions that we go through after we've identified the clients who are in that red zone. And of course, you know you can select for red zone clients in that drop-down menu on the rater page. First of all, what's the client say? That's the first order of business, right? I mean, when you're looking at this, how does the client react to their lack of change through this point? I mean, they're here in the red, and what are they saying about this whole thing? Of course, that's the whole purpose of PCOMS, is to include the client in the conversation. When we say we involve clients in all decisions that affect their care, we're not just giving lip service to that. We actually do it by discussing this lack of progress with them. You know, consider their ideas, what their viewpoint is, you know, how they think they can change, what their theories of change are, you know, all these kinds of things about them. Think about people from their resource system. Are there other people that can be involved? Family members, friends, neighbors, religious advisors, community support, all these things that are part of their life. Just think about all the things about the client. What do they think could be done now to help things get on track? The next order of business is, you know, asking the kind of hard question, is the client engaged? What are the SRS scores? If we look at that, is there an indication of any problem there? Have you talked about the alliance with the client? Have you gone over the SRS with them? And do you know already that you're not a good fit for this particular client? Are they sitting there like a bump on a log, not really engaged? If that's the case, maybe you should give someone else another shot at them. But what have you done differently so far? If we've been talking about this client in supervision for a while, then they probably have done some things differently already. And what can be done differently now is the focus of our conversation now. What can we do differently? What if other people in my supervision group, if I'm doing group, or what other ideas can we bring? What other resources can we rally to the cause? Maybe it's time for the supervisor to sit in with the therapist. Maybe a colleague can sit in. What other resources? Maybe a different service would be a good idea for this client. And finally, you know, is it time to fail successfully? You know, failing successfully is an interesting thing in our field because there's so much shame and blame associated with transferring clients, right? First is you're dumping your borderlines on me, you're dumping your hard clients, all that kind of nonsense. The other one is that somehow it says something about my competence, right? So it says nothing about the client's ability to change. It says nothing about my competence as a therapist. It just says, like every therapist on the planet, there are clients who don't respond to me, and that another provider of the service will be better for them. And what therapists learn is that when they transfer clients to colleagues and then they see those clients actually improve over time, if that's also part of your group soup process, then you learn you can help people in a couple of different ways. Directly through your own service, and indirectly by getting out of the way and moving clients on to greener pastures. A new way to feel good about the work. This is also the time you're kind of shaping the conversation. When you go through the questions, it's quite common for therapists to explain why clients aren't changing, rather than talking about what they can do differently in the next session. And that is our field to blame. That's not therapists, because we've been explaining why people don't change for a gazillion years, right? It's either because of the client's psychopathology or because of their life circumstance. And you know what? We shouldn't accept those explanations. I don't mean being strident or mean-spirited. I just encourage people to talk about what we can do differently rather than spending time on what we can't control, the things that have contributed to them not doing well so far. We have direct control over what happens in the next encounter. We don't have any control over what's already happened and created the context for the lack of change. So we're encouraging something different here. And it may take a few times. You may not formulate a plan right there on the spot. It may take 2 or 3 supervision sessions. So be realistic, but keep it moving forward. We've kind of gotten through that process, and now we're ready to actually talk about the individual therapists, how they're doing, their stats, those kinds of things. The first 2 aspects of supervision really work well in a group context. Group soup is great. You have many different resources in the room that will help you come up with different ideas. These last 2 parts are more to be done individually, to do a review of the therapist's stats and to discuss ways to improve. So here we really have to get people to be desensitized to the data and not be afraid of the data, right? We have to let them understand these key progress indicators. Average change, it's right there on the stats page. I'll look at it in a minute here. Is it above 6? If your closed cases average 6 points of change, that's fantastic. You can say that my clients on average change reliably. That's a nice thing to be able to say. The percent of your clients that are reaching the expected treatment response, right? And of course, Better Outcomes Now gives you the percent of your clients that reach 67% of what we hope for them. And also you have the percent of your clients reaching reliable and or clinically significant change. And if you want to talk like the bean counters do, you can talk about the effect size. 0.8 is the effect size typically associated with outpatient psychotherapy. We want to discuss the stats openly and encourage a development of a plan to get better. What we're doing here really is we want to foster this thing that researchers of therapist development call continued professional reflection. Keeping our development on the front burner, keeping us vitally involved in the work, because therapists need to develop and get better to stay vitally involved or they burn out. So we're going to encourage them to develop a plan and evaluate whether their plan is actually improving their outcomes. And so 30 client blocks work very well for this. So, each 30 client block is a good way to look at whether you're improving over time. 30 closed clients over time. And they can readily see whether their efforts are working out for them, whether it's improving their outcomes. Here's what that looks like. And you can see here that we have open, closed, and the last 30. So once you get 50, 100 closed clients here, you can always compare your last 30 to that to see whether or not you're improving over time and whether the strategies that you're implementing are improving your outcomes over time. You also can see, once again, the validity indicators here: raters above 32, raters above clinical cutoff, and raters with that sawtooth pattern. Finally, after we've done that, we've encouraged a plan of action, the therapist to do things to improve their outcomes. We're ready to do the final step, which is, again, encouraging this ongoing reflection about the work, which could also include skill building or client teachings. We learn the most from our experience with clients. Those are the things that change us, that make us do things differently. Generally not so much through other means, but therapists truly believe that clients are the best teachers and that they provide us the kind of experiences that shape our work over time. And supervision can help people make the best of that. Clients teach us directly with their responses about the benefit and the fit of our services. When clients aren't benefiting, that provides the best learning opportunity for us. When people just respond to our therapist business as usual, we don't learn much from that. But when they don't respond and we acknowledge that they're not responding, and then we problem solve and brainstorm what else we can do and maybe do things that we've never done before, that's when we really learn and grow as a therapist, when we step outside of our comfort zone and do something we've never done before. So what a great thing to do in supervision, and these are some of the funnest conversations I have with clinicians, thinking about their current caseloads. Did they experience anything different? Did they do something they've never done before? Did they have conversation when clients weren't changing that led them down different directions? When they identify those changes, what does it mean in terms of their identity and about their work and how they think and talk about what it is that they do? And that leads into a conversation about the identity. How do you perceive your identity as a helper, a therapist? All those kinds of very important questions. These conversations are useful because, once again, it encourages people to keep their development on the front burner and continue to think about the work that they love. That, when we're in this work a long time, sometimes the daily hassles can drag us down and we need to stay vitally involved with our clients. We need to keep our empathy very open and just really connected to our clients. And so when we're thinking thinking about our identity and thinking about our changes and growing from the work, it helps us stay more vitally involved. So I like to ask identity questions. How do you describe what you do? If you're at a cocktail party and someone says, "What do you do?" and you say, "Well, I'm a therapist at such and such agency," and they say, "Well, what does that really mean?" What do you say to that? How is it that you perceive your role? What role and what recent client really represents the essence of your identity? I like to ask those kind of questions, and getting therapists to think about those things, again, those are fun conversations to have. Here's a diagram from chapter 7 in the book about therapist identity and having people reflect about their identity. It's a nice thing to get people to do. How do you talk about, how do you think about your identity? And just as a kind of a jumping off spot for that. I really like this quote. What we do is a measure of who we are. If we imagine our work as labor, we become laborers. If we imagine our work as art, we become artists. And I believe that therapy is both. It is both art and labor. So getting people to think about what their identity is and how they describe it is very important. Remember, the therapist accounts for most of the variance of any treatment or service being administered. So if that's the case, how we're thinking about ourselves, how we're thinking about the work, how we're thinking about our client, all those things are what we bring into the room that's part of that therapist accounting for most of the variance of change. And in supervision, when they recognize their growth, when they see that they're thinking about things differently, they're doing things differently, and seeing the impact on their stats, you'll have them there. When they have conversations they haven't had before, when they recapture success with clients who would have ended negatively, when they move clients on and see them benefit, that's when you'll really have them for PCOMS.
Make it so, number one.
And that's your job as a supervisor. They learn it from you. And don't forget about those 250 free resources at www.betteroutcomesnow.com. And if you're there, check out the new PCOMS manual, your all-in-one resource for PCOMS.